The cave yawned open like the gullet of some ancient, slumbering creature. From outside, it looked like any other limestone cavern tucked away in the backwoods of the Pacific Northwest. But once you stepped inside, the walls began to glow not from any flashlight, but with a natural blue-green shimmer that pulsed gently across the mineral veins like a heartbeat. Bioluminescent algae and fungi clung to the damp stone, lighting the space with a soft, ghostly glow. It was beautiful. It was also the last place the aliens had been seen. Zayden Foster crouched at the cave's mossy entrance, brushing his gloved fingers across a set of faint impressions in the muddy ground. "Yeah, that's not a boot," he muttered. He stood slowly, adjusting the collar of his jacket against the damp air. The prints were far too narrow and deep, spaced in a way that implied a gait he didn't recognize. 4 of them. Exactly 4. No heel, no arch. Just firm, oval-shaped depressions that shimmered slightly with the cave's internal light. He flicked on his headlamp and stepped inside. The world narrowed to the echo of his own boots, the distant drip of water, and the rhythmic throb of the glowing walls. The deeper he went, the more alien the cave became. Some of the fungi had grown in shapes that looked like coral fans or tendrils, and they swayed slightly. Though there was no breeze, Zayden moved carefully, watching the trail. The prints continued almost arrogantly, straight into the darker depths. He paused now and then to check that they hadn't split off or doubled back. They hadn't. He passed a narrow crevice where the walls tightened around him. His backpack scraped the side, and he had to duck to avoid a cluster of hanging fungal bulbs that pulsed like jellyfish. He kept going deeper. Why the hell would aliens wander into a cave without an exit plan? He asked aloud, though the only answer was his own echo bouncing back. The briefing had been vague. A civilian hiker had reported strange lights and sounds from the area. Someone from the Forestry Service saw 4 figures enter the cave 2 nights ago. They hadn't come out. Zayden reached a chamber where the ceiling opened up and the floor dipped into a shallow pool. The light here was stronger, the water glowing as though lit from below. He stepped carefully around the edge, scanning for more tracks, there on the opposite bank. The same prints, one set slightly deeper than before, as if the creature had stumbled. Zayden frowned and knelt down. Something had scuffed the edge of the pool, not just a misstep, a struggle. He found a smear of a thick, translucent gel-like substance near one of the stones. He touched it with a gloved finger. It shimmered faintly and smelled faintly metallic. "No way that's from around here," he muttered. Suddenly, a noise echoed from deeper inside the cave. Not the natural drip of water, this was sharper. A sort of metallic chittering, followed by a dull thud. Zayden rose to his feet and drew the flare gun from his belt. He didn't need it for light, the cave was already aglow, but if something panicked and ran at him, it might buy him time to get clear. He advanced toward the sound. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing him to crouch. The bioluminescent fungi dimmed here, and he flicked on his headlamp again. The beam cut through the gloom, catching movement ahead. Something flinched and ducked behind a rock column. Zayden froze. "Hello," he called. "No reply. I'm not here to hurt you. If you're trapped, I can help." A pause. Then a figure stepped cautiously into the beam of his light. It was tall, at least 7 feet, but narrow, with limbs that bent in odd angles. Its skin was a mottled gray-blue, and its eyes were wide and reflective. It blinked slowly, cautiously. Zayden lowered the flare gun a little. "You're not the only one, are you?" he asked. The creature hesitated, then stepped aside. Behind it, 2 others emerged. One leaned heavily against the wall, limping. The third moved more confidently but glanced nervously down the tunnel behind them. Zayden noticed their breathing fast, shallow. They were disoriented, lost, possibly injured. He lowered the flare gun all the way. "All right, let's figure out how to get you out of here." One of the aliens pointed behind them down the tunnel and made a series of rapid gestures with its hands, not human sign language, but clearly an attempt at communication. Zayden didn't understand it, but the message was clear enough. Something was wrong back there. "Okay, not that way then." He turned, beckoning them to follow. They didn't move. He paused, then took off his backpack and carefully removed an emergency ration bar. He unwrapped it and took a bite himself, then held it out. The nearest alien tilted its head, then took it gently and sniffed it before handing it to the injured one. Zayden waited. The injured alien took a small bite, chewed slowly, and after a moment nodded. The others followed suit. They were starting to trust him. Good, now let's move. He led them back the way he had come, retracing the trail through the glowing corridors. The aliens moved silently, their steps light and deliberate, unlike his own bootfalls. They reached the chamber with the glowing pool again. The injured alien hesitated, then staggered. Zayden caught it before it could fall. Easy now, I got you. The alien was heavier than it looked. Zayden adjusted his grip and helped it sit on a dry patch of stone. He checked its limb, maybe a leg. It had a twisted joint and discoloration along the side. He couldn't tell if it was broken, but it didn't look good. I can't carry you the whole way, he said. We've still got at least a mile to go. He dug into his pack and pulled out a collapsible trekking pole. He extended it fully and wrapped some cloth around the top before handing it over. The alien took it, testing its weight. It nodded once. They moved on, slower now. Hours passed. The cave felt like a maze. Once they reached a fork Zayden didn't remember. He paused, frowning, then checked the walls. The algae here glowed more brightly on one side the way he had come. He led them that way. At one point, a tremor shook the cave. Dust fell from above. Zayden grabbed the nearest alien and pulled it back from a ledge just as a section of stone collapsed into the abyss below. Okay, he said, coughing on the dust. No more shortcuts. They pressed on. By the time they reached the entrance chamber again, Zayden's legs were shaking. The injured alien leaned heavily on the pole, its breathing rough. The others supported it on either side. The opening to the outside shone with daylight. Zayden stepped aside and pointed. There, out. The aliens looked at one another. Then one stepped forward and touched Zayden's shoulder gently. A moment passed. Zayden didn't move. It was a gesture of thanks, he assumed. Then they stepped into the light. Zayden followed them out, blinking against the brightness. At the tree line, a figure waited. A woman in a dark uniform with a patch on her sleeve, Forestry Service. Zayden, she called. You found them, he nodded. They're alive. One's hurt pretty bad, might need a vac. The woman stepped forward, her gaze flicking to the aliens. Are they dangerous? No, Zayden said. Just lost. Same as anyone else would be. The aliens turned back once at the edge of the clearing. One gave a slow nod, then they disappeared into the trees. Zayden exhaled and sank to the ground. Need a ride back? The woman asked. Yeah, he said, rubbing at his knees. And maybe a hot shower. And coffee, a lot of it. She helped him to his feet. You'll have to file a report. Of course, he said. But you might want to hold off on calling NASA. These guys seem more scared of us than anything else. She nodded slowly. Together, they walked back toward the ranger station. Behind them, the cave glowed faintly in the shadows, a place of light, danger, and something like understanding. The ranger station was a squat timber structure tucked among skeletal spruce trees, with a wraparound porch that creaked underfoot and a radio antenna listing slightly in the wind. Inside, it smelled like old paper and pine cleaner. Zayden sat on a folding cot in the back room, one leg bouncing rhythmically, still damp from the cave. His jacket was draped over the desk chair, and a half-eaten protein bar sat next to an untouched mug of herbal tea someone had optimistically made for him. Sit still, or you'll dislocate something, said the ranger, Mira, as she wrapped gauze around a fresh scrape on Zayden's forearm. I thought it was just a scratch. It is. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be clean. You don't know what kind of spores were floating around in there. If I start glowing in the dark, you'll know why. I'll keep you outside with the porch lights off and see if you attract moths. Zayden cracked a grin, but his fingers twitched as he looked out the rain-streaked window. The trees were still, no sign of movement, no sign of blue skin or reflective eyes, just branches and mist. So, Mira said, taping off the bandage, what exactly were they doing in that cave, from what I could tell, panicking? One of them twisted something in their leg. They didn't talk, not really, but they stuck together. Like a unit, military, could be, or family, hard to tell. Mira leaned against the desk, arms folded, her expression unreadable. You know, I logged it. I figured. Not with NASA, not with Homeland. I sent it to the Interagency Anomalous Phenomena Office. Zayden blinked. That's still real, barely. It's got a 3-person staff and a fax machine from the 80s, but they'll take it seriously. Leaning forward, he rubbed his temples. They didn't seem hostile, just confused. And that cave wasn't random. Something in there rattled them. You think it was a trap, more like they came in looking for something, didn't expect it to react. Mira nodded slowly, then pulled out a laminated map and unfolded it on the desk. This whole ridge is riddled with karst formations. That cave you found, only one of dozens. Some go for miles underground. If they're in the area, they could still be down there. They left. Did they? Zayden's head snapped up. Mira pointed to a red mark she'd circled near the southern edge of the forest. This morning, a hiker reported seeing figures near the old Firewatch tower. Tall, thin, moving fast, left no tracks. Zayden stood, grabbed his jacket. How long ago? Hour, maybe less. You're still wet. I'll dry off when I get there. She tossed him a thermal poncho. Use this. Temperature's dropping. He caught it, pulling it over his shoulders as he ducked out the door. The trail to the Firewatch tower twisted through thick underbrush and slick stone. He moved fast, boots kicking up soil, branches tugging at his sleeves. He didn't stop to rest. Not when the wind carried faint thuds and something like static crackling over the treetops. By the time he reached the clearing, the tower loomed above him, its rusted frame swaying faintly. The ladder creaked as he climbed, each rung icy under his fingers. At the top, the cabin was empty at first glance. Then he noticed the hatch in the floor was ajar. He crouched beside it and listened. No voices. But there was movement, deliberate and soft. He tapped once on the frame, a pause. Then, slowly, one of the aliens emerged from below. It was the smaller one, with a faint greenish hue along its torso. It stood silently, watching him, then stepped aside. He climbed down into the crawlspace. The injured one lay curled with its limbs tucked close, a makeshift brace fashioned from snapped metal struts and strips of thermal blanket wrapped around its leg. The third alien stood near a broken radio panel, examining the dials as if trying to understand their function. Zayden crouched beside the injured one and opened his medkit. I don't have a splint, he muttered, more to himself than to them. But I've got enough to stabilize it better than that. He slid the brace free carefully. The alien tensed but didn't resist. The leg was swollen with a deep purplish bruise under the skin, no external bleeding. He palpated gently along the joint. No bone movement, probably a ligament. Bad sprain, maybe a partial tear. All right, you're lucky. Nothing's poking where it shouldn't be. He wrapped it tightly with an elastic band and reinforced it with a cut section of fiberglass rod from his kit. The alien made a low, clicking sound, not distressed, more like acknowledgement. Yeah, I know. Should have been a vet. The third alien stepped behind him and held out something in its elongated fingers, a narrow, transparent crystal with embedded filaments. It pulsed faintly. Is that? Zayden took it carefully. It was warm. A recorder, the alien pointed to it, then to the injured one, then to the hatch above. Data from the cave, a nod. You want me to take this? Another nod. He tucked it into one of the inner pockets of his jacket. I'll get it to the right people. The injured alien tapped his shoulder gently. He turned. It pointed upward, then at him, then back to its own chest. You want to go back, a pause. Then it pointed to the forest. Oh. You're leaving. The alien curled its fingers into a fist and tapped its chest twice. Zayden mirrored the motion. I hope you find your way. The smaller alien reached over and touched the side of his head lightly. Not aggressive, curious. Its fingers were cool with small ridges along the pads. Then it withdrew. Zayden climbed back up first. The sky had darkened, clouds rolling in. Below, the forest lay silent. One by one, the aliens emerged. They moved with more confidence now, even the injured ones supported on either side. They didn't head for the trail. Instead, they turned toward the ridgeline and disappeared into the trees without a word, their movements almost soundless. Zayden stood watching until the last glimpse of gray-blue skin vanished between the trunks. Then he pulled the crystal from his pocket. It pulsed once, then projected a narrow beam downward onto the wooden floor of the tower's deck. Symbols appeared floating, rotating slowly. Not letters, not numbers, something else. He reached for his phone to photograph it. Before he could tap the screen, the symbols collapsed inward, leaving only the beam, then the crystal went dark. "Of course," he muttered. He slid it back into his jacket. Below, the wind picked up. Distant thunder rolled across the hills. He turned and climbed down the ladder. Back at the ranger station, Mira looked up from the radio as he entered. "They gone. For now," she nodded toward the stove. "I made chili." Zayden sat down and peeled off his poncho. "You're going to need to call that agency again." "Why?" He pulled the crystal out and placed it on the table. "Because I think they left us homework." Mira tapped it once. "Nothing happened. Figures. If they come back, I want to be ready." She ladled chili into a bowl. "You planning to camp out in the cave?" "No, but I might start mapping the rest of those tunnels." "You think they'll use them again?" "Not them," Zayden said. "But maybe someone else. If they weren't the first to come through, they won't be the last." Mira slid the bowl across the table. "Eat before you start playing Cosmic Tour Guide." He picked up the spoon. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. The forest held its breath. The air inside the ranger station turned sharp with the smell of solder and scorched plastic. Zayden hunched over the disassembled shortwave radio, carefully threading copper wire into a new coil. A dozen stripped parts lay scattered across the table. Capacitors, resistors, a cracked tuner dial. He wasn't repairing it for use, he was building something new. A single dim bulb above the work table buzzed faintly. Outside, dusk pressed in on the windows, turning the forest into a silhouette of jagged limbs and shifting shadows. Mira leaned against the doorframe with a thermos in one hand. "You raided the weather station's radio for parts?" "They weren't using it," Zayden muttered, tightening a screw. "And I need a wideband transmitter. That crystal isn't going to start talking just because you builded a friend. I don't want it to talk. I want to see if it reacts." Mira set the thermos down beside him. "You haven't slept since you got back." "I'm fine. You're twitching." "I always twitch when I solder." She leaned closer, watching as he clipped off a section of antenna tubing and slotted it into the makeshift frame. "That's the third contraption you've made since yesterday. What happened to the last one?" "Vibrated itself off the shelf and shattered. This one has a dampener." "You're not trying to contact them, are you?" "No," he said, then paused. "Yes, but not in the hello again way. I want to understand what they left behind." Mira scratched the side of her jaw. "What if it's not meant for us? Then it won't respond. But if it does, I want to be the one who catches it." He adjusted a final dial and sat back. The device looked like a cross between a ham radio and a toaster, with an antenna shaped like a tuning fork sticking out the top. He placed the crystal onto the center receiver pad and flipped the switch. Nothing happened. Then, faintly, a vibration hummed through the table. The crystal glowed not bright, but enough to cast a halo the size of a coin. Symbols appeared again, hovering just above its surface. This time they didn't collapse. They rotated slowly, steady and deliberate. Mira blinked. "You're kidding." "I think it's a map." He tapped the edge of the table. They were trying to find something underground, maybe another access point, or maybe they were following something that moved. Something. Sound, energy, light. The cave system's full of weird geology. Piezoelectric resonance, thermal pockets, magnetic anomalies. One of those could have triggered a reaction. She narrowed her eyes. "You think they got lost chasing a signal or testing one? Maybe they were trying to find the source." The symbols shifted again, forming a spiral. Then they vanished, the crystal dimmed, and this time it stayed that way. Zayden stood, rubbing his eyes. "I think that's all we're getting." Mira reached for the thermos and handed it to him. Drink, and then you're taking a nap on that cot whether you want to or not. He took it without protest. By the time he woke, morning had broken clear and cold. Sunlight filtered through the treetops, casting long beams into the clearing. Birds called from the canopy, normal ones, not the kind that went silent around anomalies. He stepped outside, stretching stiff limbs. Mira sat on the porch steps with her boots off and a steaming mug in hand. Coffee's still warm. Miracle? Couple of forestry guys came by earlier, asked about seismic readings. Apparently someone picked up tremors 2 nights ago. Zayden sat beside her. Let me guess, epicenter right under that cave. Right under it, he whistled low. That wasn't a cave-in. That was something moving. She handed him the mug. You want to go back in? No, she arched an eyebrow. I want to go under it. He stood and walked back inside, emerging a few minutes later with a duffel bag and a worn topo map. He pointed to a section about a mile east of the original cave. There's an old mine shaft here, sealed off decades ago, but if the tunnels extend far enough it might connect. Mira frowned. That's a long shot. Better than spelunking into a sinkhole again, at least this one had ladders. By midday, they reached the mine entrance. A rusted gate sagged inward. Barely held in place by a chain someone had wrapped half-heartedly around a post. Zayden clipped the chain with bolt cutters and pushed the gate open. The shaft sloped downward at a shallow angle, reinforced with timber beams blackened by time. He paused every few steps to tap the walls with a pole, listening for hollow spots. The air was cold and dry, different from the damp cave, but still stale. They advanced slowly, Mira behind him with a handheld monitor that chirped occasionally with geologic readings. At one point, the tunnel forked. Zayden turned left, following a subtle draft. After an hour of navigating, they reached a collapsed corridor. Rubble clogged the passage, but a narrow gap remained at the top. Think you can fit through that? Mira asked, not gracefully. She handed him a rope. I'll anchor from here. If it looks unstable, yell, I'll pull. He nodded and slipped through, shoulders scraping stone. The passage opened into a low chamber with crystalline growths along the ceiling. They pulsed faintly familiar. Zayden moved forward, scanning the ground, no footprints. But in the dust, he saw drag marks long parallel, as if something had been pulled. He followed them to the far side of the chamber, where the wall had cracked open into a narrow tunnel. Light spilled from within, not sunlight, but that same blue-green shimmer he knew too well. He crouched and peered inside. The tunnel curved downward, and at its mouth lay a discarded object. He retrieved it, a narrow metallic tool with grooves along one side, coated in dried gel. It wasn't human. He backed out and called up the tunnel. I found another entrance. One they didn't intend to use. Mira's voice echoed down, You okay? Yeah, but I think I know where they were trying to go. He rejoined her, showing the tool. She turned it over in her hands. It's broken, or spent. Either way, they dropped it, leaving in a hurry. They made their way back to the surface. By the time they emerged, the sky had clouded over again, wind rattling the trees. Back at the station, Zayden laid the tool beside the crystal and took out a notebook. He sketched what he remembered of the tunnel, the marks on the floor, the layout of the chamber. Mira watched him for a moment before speaking. You think we've seen the last of them? Zayden capped his pen. I think they didn't expect to find something down there that could fight back. She folded her arms. You mean the cave? I mean whatever they were following. Maybe it wasn't just a geological oddity. Maybe it was alive or artificial or both. Mira walked to the window. There's a line where curiosity turns into recklessness. Good thing we haven't crossed it yet. She gave him a sideways glance. We're halfway to building a translator for a rock. A translator, he said. That just taught us how to find a cave network no one's mapped since the 30s. She didn't argue. Later that evening, the last of the equipment was packed away. The crystal and tool were locked in a case, sealed with Mira's field tag. The makeshift transmitter was dismantled, its parts returned to their original homes. Zayden stood outside the station, watching the tree line. The forest had returned to its usual rhythm: wind, birds, rustling branches. No flickers of unnatural light, no distorted echoes. Mira joined him, hands in her pockets. "You ready to file the report?" he exhaled. "Yeah, but I'm leaving the last page blank." "Why, in case they come back?" She nodded once, then turned toward the porch. "Dinner's on the stove." "You're not skipping again." He followed her inside. The forest held steady. No more tremors, no more visitors. Just the lingering trace of something old, buried deep, and the odd certainty that whatever had passed through had learned as much from them as they had from it. The last light faded from the crystal that night. It didn't glow again.